Bilal, the Regional Director for IUCN Asia Pacific, to start moderating the session. Thank you, Dindo.
Thank you very much, and welcome again to this first plenary session that we have today. We still see people coming into the room, but we'll get started. From this morning when we opened and until today, there was one key message that we've heard throughout this APAN dialogue. Climate adaptation, and especially transformational change, is the work of no one, but of everyone. And we say everyone, it means we recognize that we're really talking about distinct yet interdependent systems. And that's what we're discussing this afternoon, how these different natural ecosystems, human activity systems intersect and support towards transformational adaptation. And we have assembled together today the distinguished panel of speakers coming from different sectors and perspectives. But to help us set the scene today, I'm really honored to introduce someone who's going to tell us what is it when we talk about systems, the complexities, and the linkages. So setting the scene today is Winston Chow, which I will be honored to introduce. So Winston is a professor of urban climate and Lee Kong Chan Research Fellow at the Singapore Management University, SMU. And he's been principal investigator. He's been involved in a lot of work around climate, but I think for today, the one I'm really most proud to mention is that he was elected in 2023 as co-chair of the IPCC and Working Group on Impacts, Adaptation, Vulnerability. I was looking for something on the urban part. Yeah. Urban part as well. So Winston, take us through and provide the framing for today. Over to you.
Thank you, Dindo. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all again. For those of you who were here this morning and listened to me set the stage about adaptation issues, I apologize if you listen to me talk again, but it's on a variation on a theme. I'll be talking about transformational adaptation, particularly on the linkages, the diversities, and what sort of synergies that arise. I will be talking, starting off with the content on how transformational adaptation was covered in the 6th assessment cycle, which started off after the seminal Paris Agreement was set up in 2015. And it was a very ambitious cycle in which I was a lead author in the Working Group 2 report on cities, settlements, and key infrastructure, where transformational adaptation themes were covered. It was also, as most of us recall, but some of us do not want to recall, beset with the COVID pandemic. So writing this report during that time was quite a challenge, but we felt that with the 6 reports plus the synthesis report, we covered quite a bit of ground in terms of the challenge of what governments wanted us to do in covering adaptation issues from Paris. And in this cycle, the 7th assessment cycle, in my conclusion to my scene-setting presentation, I'll again ask for your help in terms of helping to review the special report on cities, but we'll also try to point out what we want to cover with the transformative potential of adaptation in mind, not just in Working Group 2, but across working groups as well. So from that, if you recall in my morning presentation, I started off by defining what adaptation is. I want to point out the subtle differences in terms of how the author teams did the assessment between the 5th assessment report that concluded in 2013-2014 towards the 6th assessment report that concluded in 2022-2023. You can see that the initial definition of transformational adaptation on the left was quite, I would say, basic, because the literature on that potential wasn't as well established as it was during the 6th assessment cycle, when there was a much stronger literature base, which allowed us to focus in on 4 themes. One was that the scope of adaptation. The second is that the depth of adaptation. The third was the speed or rapidity of adaptation. And the fourth was how it engaged with limits to adaptation. Those 4 themes are what we can use to see whether adaptation is transformational versus that of incremental adaptation, which you can see is like the converse of these themes. So apologies that you may not be able to look into this. It's a bit, the font is very small, but I would like to invite delegates to look into the summary for policymakers, or in this case, chapter 16 of the Working Group 2 report, where it breaks down the 4 main dimensions of depth, scope, speed, and how it engages the limits of adaptation in terms of low, medium, and high dimensions according to a spectrum. So those elements that the authors of that chapter engaged with was the key in determining the diversity and the synergies of how adaptation can be transformational. Now, I'm here to set the scene, but I would encourage everybody in this room to listen to what my fellow panelists will have to say about this over the next 90 minutes, because they will engage with this in depth. I'm just here to give the appetizer or the hors d'oeuvre. But I want to start off by saying, how do we integrate them across systems and the rationale behind it? So a few things of note. If you want to engage with system transitions, you need to look for existing socio-technological and environmental systems that are apparent in cities, apparent in the water system, apparent in the agriculture and food systems, and in natural ecosystems as well. This engagement is not siloed. It looks across silos so that the diversity of systems can lead to the integration of adaptation approaches that are transformational. This sense is also important because if you recall this morning, I talked about the worsening risks that we face with every incremental increase in global temperatures. It would be a fantastic way of managing these risks, especially as we move in terms of a green transition that includes mitigation in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions that are needed for climate resilience. Furthermore, an engagement across systems substantially reduces the risk of maladaptation in happening. Furthermore, we need to also have this cross-sector engagement for adaptation approaches that is transparent, that is informed, and inclusive in terms of decision-making of these approaches, including a role for both indigenous knowledge and local knowledge in terms of successful and sustained adaptation. I'll talk about some examples. Hopefully I'm not stealing the thunder from the panel, but I'll leave it up to you to go into detail. But some sectors of note include health, agriculture, water, urban, land and ocean ecosystems, and the energy sector. I'll speak to 4 in this case. In terms of how to integrate across systems, for health, if you want to look out for climate-sensitive diseases relating to heat, stress, for instance, or vector-borne diseases, you can adapt to it by looking into early warning systems that integrate integrate weather data, engages with public health services, as well as with community networks to reduce the risks that emerge from these sort of climate-sensitive diseases. For agriculture, you should look into agroecological farming and diversification of crops that can improve resilience to climate impact drivers of drought, as well as secondary impacts from pests that can also spread to new or emerging regions because of changes in weather and climate. So these are much more sustainable as opposed to just scaling up traditional irrigation measures. So you can see how the transformative potential is engaged in that sense. For water management, IWRM, or Integrated Water Resource Management, coordinates land, surface, and groundwater use, not just discharges from rivers or irrigation, so that you can ensure long-term supply under changing drought and flood conditions, the cases of too much water or too little water that can affect your water resource management. Lastly, ecosystem-based adaptation. The concern is you need to restore mangroves or forests so that it can support multiple systems at once. These offer coastal protection from storm surges, water filtration to improve water quality, as well as biodiversity co-benefits for communities who rely on those ecosystems for their livelihoods. Note that the parentheses at the end refer to the relevant chapter and sections of the Working Group 2 report if you need more information on the assessment of these sectors. There's a figure in the Summary for Policymakers in the Working Group 2 report that speaks towards a pathway of transformational adaptation that relates to the importance of climate resilience and development, also known as climate resilient development, a combination of biodiversity conservation, adaptation, as well as mitigation and sustainable development. The challenge is to try and find ways to shift from the current scene of the picture on the left, the present day, towards urgent and timely action that includes governance, finance, knowledge and capacity, catalyzing conditions, and technologies as enablers to allow for future climate change that limits global warming, as well as limits the risks that we face as we move beyond 1.5. So in terms of climate resilient development pathways, that chapter 16 in Working Group 2 did in AR6, a few sectors of note that I wanted to point out that I'm more comfortable with in terms of urban systems. So one thing that I talked about this morning is the usefulness of nature-based solutions or physical infrastructure that can be combined into heat-resilient design, green roofs, reflective surfaces, cooling corridors, that simultaneously reduce health risks and cut energy demand. For land and ecosystems, you can look into integrated land use planning, combining reforestation, sustainable farming, and conservation while maintaining biodiversity, the key tenet of climate resilient development, while also securing food and water supplies in the age of droughts, floods, heat waves. One underrated, underemphasized system transition is that of societal transition, which I'm glad to hear over the course of this conference so far. You need to focus in on inclusivity of governance, inclusivity of participation. Bring in indigenous knowledge and local knowledge that is recognized, because this is critical for managing forests and fisheries under changing climates. So we had a start to that in AR6 in terms of engaging with the content of societal transition. The key message of all this so far is that piecemeal, siloed solutions is insufficient. You need transformational adaptation that aligns transitions across these systems simultaneously. So watch out for that in terms of principles of how to engage with it. At the end of AR6, when the author teams tried to look for evidence of transformational adaptation, there was little, I would say, because as I say, it's related to the literature base for transformational adaptation. But there are encouraging and emerging evidence of such transformational adaptation that tackles the depth, the scope, the speed, and the limits that I mentioned earlier. The darker colors, so the boxes there indicates the several regions of the WMO, and the darker colors indicates evidence of where transformational adaptation was happening. Some regions had it more than others, in Central and South America at the bottom left, and in parts of North America in the top left. These had that multi-dimensional aspects that were tackled simultaneously. So emerging signs are there, but we recognize the challenges of trying to have adaptation that's fast, wide in scope, deep challenges, but also involves trade-offs, which I believe is something that we have to consider in terms of this aspect of adaptation. So what enablers can support transformational adaptation? It can move beyond pilot projects into institutionalized practice. 4 IDs or identifiers can be noted. Finance, in terms of risk-layered financial instruments, you can read that there. This requires scaling and sustained investment, so this was tackled in chapter 17 of the last report. Governance, it's been said many times over the course of the day, I won't belabor the point, but long-term planning helps, particularly in reducing maladaptive practices from lock-in, from coastal infrastructure in this case, that will be at risk under sea level rise. Ecological management is also a critical enabler. Notice the interface between management from the human systems perspective with natural ecosystems perspectives. Coral reef protection strategies, for instance, that only focus on local scale pollution control is insufficient. Transformational adaptation requires coupling this with emissions reductions at a larger scale, as well as larger scale marine spatial planning. So think beyond the local if you want to manage ecosystems well. And lastly, social equity. If you don't address inequalities, adaptation measures will risk becoming maladaptive. If you price water reforms differently with the hope of reducing water demand, that might disadvantage poorer households and lead to critical maladaptation in that sense. How much time do I have left? 3 minutes, great. So I've set the scene, hopefully, and I will allow my esteemed panelists to carry on the discussion, which I'm really interested to listen and engage with. But I want to end on a note on moving from AR6 towards AR7. My co-chair, Bart van den Hoek from the Netherlands and myself, we want to carry on the good work from AR6 towards this assessment cycle, we want to make sure our reports are very strongly implementation-oriented and can have actionable or activating points. So you'll see that if you look at the publicly available scoped outlines for Working Group 2, a lot of the attention there is on implementation, best seen in the technical guidelines of impacts and adaptation that we've been tasked to deliver, that updates on a 32-year-old document. We also want to focus in on the local knowledge because we feel, or we've seen, not feel, we've seen and we've looked into the strong case that local knowledge is a critical enabler for transformational adaptation. So in order for this to happen, you can see that the authors that we have selected, as well as with our engagement, we talk a lot with policymakers and practitioners, public and private, corporates and citizens, because we want to make this report as relevant to as many stakeholders as we can. And it implies language that speaks about scenarios, that maps risks, trade-offs, and transfers of costs and benefits that are essential in determining the sustainability of adaptation that reduces impacts and reduces vulnerabilities. And lastly, on the top right, the AR6 report with 7 reports weighed 29.1 kilograms when the DHL reached my office. Nobody has the time to read that. We want thinner reports because thinner reports means more potential for action. If you want an update on the report timelines, my working group is tasked with the administrative lead of the special report on climate change and cities. The authors, after we pushed them a bit, have submitted a first order draft. This will be available for expert review, and I would like to invite delegates of the APAN conference to register as expert reviewers so that you can have access to the drafts and help us, because without revealing too much, transformational adaptation is a key theme in the chapters on solutions as well as the chapter on enablers. So we would like that feedback, or the author teams would like that feedback as we develop this report. For the 7th assessment report for Working Group 2, we have selected the authors and we are preparing for the first lead author meeting, as Sir Jim Ski mentioned this morning. For the first time ever, we're having a joint lead author meeting with all 3 working groups in one venue in Paris this December. It's going to be fun. Thank you very much once again for bearing with me. The usual slide applies. If you have not had the opportunity to take this QR code and join our mailing list, please do so. And we also have a link tree that has all the resources, including this talk eventually. If you want to contact myself and my colleagues as well, we'll be happy to do so through our available platforms that are in our link tree. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vincent.
Ooh, that was close. Almost got out.
Now we're all excited and looking forward to AR7. And thanks for the nice glimpse. As you said, it's so exciting, front and center. We're now going to be talking about indigenous knowledge. We're talking about inclusive governance. That's going to be a first, and we are all looking forward to that. But back to APAN, what Winston has done, and I think, Babu, one of the most powerful slides I've seen, at least today, was Winston's slide number 2, which is unpacking what are the dimensions of transformational adaptation. The other thing, and which leads us to the panel discussion now, are the enablers. It's a nice list, and now we're going to be listening to our panel give us examples how that it's done. The one thing I did notice for this plenary session is this is a session of plurals, and that's why it's a challenge. Did you notice in the title, we're talking about systems, we're talking about synergies, and we're talking about diversities. You can imagine how it's going to be an exciting discussion this afternoon. How do you put all those plurals together? And we are going to hear from our panels consisting of 2 parts. The first one will be our panelists who will represent the perspective of systems. And then we'll look at it from the point of view of geographies. So I'm going to start with the first set of panels. That's Robert, Rebati, and Achala. Starting with Robert. And may I introduce you, Robert, before I ask for your intervention. So Robert represents FEO. Currently, he's Deputy Regional Rep. And before 2024, when he took on the position, he was already Special Advisor to the ADG and the Regional Rep for Asia Pacific, also here in Bangkok. I think what's unique with what we have done, Robert, is now that you're here in the regional office, before that you were in Bangladesh, in the country office. You were also in headquarters, so I think you basically been in all the key places of the FAO structure. But what's interesting in our discussion today, representing food and agricultural system, we've heard about FAO, how you've been at the forefront of promoting so-called integrated approaches. We talk about your 4 betters, climate smart agriculture, ecosystem restoration, food and nutrition. It would be interesting for us to listen to you now in terms of how does one progress in one system? If we, for the moment, we talk about agri-food system, unlock resilience benefits in the others, especially in relation to the other systems represented here today, whether it's health, whether it's urban infrastructure, it's biodiversity. And if I just complete the question, what then should we be doing in terms of enabling transformational adaptation? What's been FAO's journey in all of this today? Over to you, Robert.
No pressure. Indeed, no pressure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and our keynote, all of our distinguished panelists and ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, no pressure at all. That's really, you've sort of asked me to unpack the entire mandate of FAO in 5 minutes. I'll do my best to do a rapid fire of this. But when referring to the 4 betters, it's better nutrition, better production, better environment, and better life. Within this, these are the 4 pillars of our strategic framework in FAO. And when you look at this, it basically encompasses a systematic approach to how we do business. Now, within FAO, agriculture stands for, when we unpack it to our members, it looks through agriculture, forestry, production, animal husbandry, did I mention forestry, fisheries, climate change. So there's a whole gamut of things that we lump into agriculture. And supporting our members to improve their methods on agriculture. So what I just wanted to note after that it's a privilege to be here today, and I appreciate the importance of this forum and the importance of this plenary discussion. But so for us, as I've explained, agri-food systems are really at the heart of our work, but also at the heart of our climate ambition, in that we have put forward the linkage between our production systems, our processing systems, our marketing, waste management, et cetera, linking to all of the climate challenges that we face today. So this is one of the biggest interfaces that we undertake as we move forward. Now, if you recall, in 2021, the UN Food Systems Summit held in Rome, and basically a sponsorship of the UN agencies with all the member nations to come together and dialogue on our food systems, was really a foundational moment. And we recognize that the Food Systems Summit demonstrated that our food systems are not fit for purpose. And further to that, one of the main messages coming out of it, that upwards of 33% of greenhouse gases globally stem from our food systems. And you look at the full gamut of our food systems, this includes packaging, marketing, transport, processing, waste management, or decomposition of products. It's quite a challenging environment to deal with. But FAO maintains its mandate and its clear commitment to address agriculture through a food systems approach, which again encompasses our 4 betters. So the first area that I really wanted to look at or present to you as a concrete example of trying to draw the integrated approach and the concrete efforts to have a systematic approach to how we address some of these components of food systems, but also climate change, is through the Food Systems Summit. And coming out of this summit, it brought together all the members in Rome, Italy. It provided an opportunity for all members to assess their food systems or the components of their food systems, but also look at this as a global system. And essentially the Food Systems Summit was focused around 5 different thematic areas, looking at production, nutrition and health, climate action, building resilience, but also logistics of our food systems, the transport. Within this, every member country was invited to prepare long in advance of this event a pathway document that describes how they would like to see their food system evolve to be more fit for purpose. Subsequent meetings every 2 years, there's a stock taking and updates. Subsequent meetings allowed for further development of work plans and also budgeting of these pathway documents. These pathway documents serve as a foundational component or leveraging policy support, leveraging the multilateral system, leveraging multiple stakeholders, multiple ministries across the board within countries, but also globally, to address the food systems in this perspective. I won't say more on this, but it's a very strong policy opportunity, and it brings together multiple UN agencies, multiple global partners on this topic. And so I think this is a good example of this integrated approach in bringing people together. The UN Food Systems Summit Hub will have an event, I believe it's tomorrow, so I encourage all of you to participate in that. I think very important. Very quickly, I want to also look at technology and technical support as one of the components of taking a systematic and integrated approach to this. And just one example that I think is quite useful and going deep into the science is that we work with and convene opportunities for example, ministries of agriculture with national meteorology or hydrology departments or service providers to really develop responsive systems that help farmers adapt to the climatic change that they're engaged in the soil quality, et cetera. And so we have a couple of examples very clearly in Lao PDR, but also in Bangladesh, where we've worked very closely to develop systems that feed into early warning in terms of climatic challenges. So early warning systems, but also systems that are online at your fingertips in an application where you can see weather forecasting, you can see online opportunities for agricultural extension, you have market pricing. Some of the producer organizations, when we get down to the community level, we've been able to support them to develop market linkages, so they're selling directly to buyers instead of having transporters that are reaping high levels of profit. Ultimately, this changes behavior. It allows them to adjust their farming practice to the climate issues. If there's a big cyclone coming or a particularly dry spring season or whatever it may be, there's a very clear, we have 85% feedback that farmers are changing their behavior based on this. They're using different crop varieties, so this touches on the diversification issue, and they're changing their water management considerations given the information that's available to them. I think I have maybe 1 or 2 more minutes, but I wanted to focus as well on a third component that I think is extremely important. It was already touched on, is the access to finance. And one area, particularly on a regional basis, we've worked with ASEAN, but have similar initiatives with other countries in other areas. We've helped support ASEAN to develop a climate resilience network. And this is a platform, amongst other things, we've been working with them to help them access climate financing at a national level, but also for localized initiatives. And just a note on this, 1%, less than 1% of climate financing, either public or private sources, actually reach smallholder farmers. And in this region, Asia and Pacific, this is the largest percentage of smallholder farmers on the planet. It's the breadbasket of the world in a number of different products, particularly fisheries and rice and other staples. So extremely important to look at this. And I noticed somewhat down the table, our colleagues from GCF were organizing a readiness program within the Climate Resilience Network, which is helping them develop strategic proposals eventually for GCF or other potential funders, looking at climate resilient fisheries and aquaculture. This is in Cambodia and the Philippines. Sustainable low emission rice production, which is an absolute must in this region, which is being developed in Malaysia and Vietnam. And then climate smart agriculture systems in Lao PDR and Thailand specifically through this initiative, but we do have other financing mechanisms for other countries in the same topics. The last 2 points on financing I think are extremely important to consider is in this resilience perspective is looking at possible risk insurance facilities. So we're working with Southeast Asia Disaster Risk Insurance Facility to consider how you develop risk management insurance systems for crop insurance. And a second area of financing is through green bonds for sustainable agriculture mechanisms. So bringing all of these points together within the agri-food system is absolute priority and allows us to work with governments and help them move down the line on building more sustainability, more resilience, more diversification, and opportunities for their farmers to move from subsistence to becoming agripreneurs, I think is one of maybe the bottom line for the work we do with our farmers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've heard agricultural systems, food systems. Let's now take it one step further, health systems. I'm really very pleased to introduce our second panelist, Dr. Ribati Palki. She's from the UN University based in Malaysia, director of the International Institute of Global Health, also honorary associate professor in the same field at the University of Heidelberg. Connecting back to IPCC, she was part of AR6, contributing author and lead author for the UNEP Adaptation Gap Report on health. Ribati, we've already heard before and during this session about climate impacts on human health. Today, we also want to hear from you, how can we identify and address cross-system vulnerabilities, turning it around? What are actions in the health system that would unlock benefits across the other systems and beyond? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And I realized when I looked at the program that there were not many events which were focusing on health. So I will take the liberty of going through a few numbers just to outline the scale of the problem that health systems are facing. I would begin with saying that almost 24% of the global deaths are linked to modifiable environmental factors. And almost 75% of the re-emerging diseases that we have seen in the last decade, they have been associated with environmental risk factors and the One Health aspect that comes around it. Now, climate resilient environmental and socio-economic systems, I see them as fundamental investments for advancing global public health for reasons that I will outline below. If you take the urban and the transport systems, air pollution is responsible for almost 7 million premature deaths, both indoor and outdoor air pollutions. 1 in 8 people in the world are living with obesity. And there is evidence that low walkability in cities increases obesity risk by almost 30%. If you look at the water security component, diarrheal diseases are claiming more than 1 million lives in a year. And yet 80% of the wastewater in the region is discharged with little or no treatment. Globally, almost 1.1 billion people were served by healthcare facilities that lacked basic wash and water services. And that, of course, manifests into adverse birth outcomes, infectious diseases that we see, and other health outcomes that you see in facility-based care for populations. If you look at the energy component, 1 billion people are served by facilities with no or unreliable sources of electricity, which again translates into deaths, particularly in maternal and newborn services. 12% of the facilities in South Asia have no access to electricity at all. If you look at the food and nutrition system, I will go very quickly because Robert has outlined that very quickly. But of course, undernutrition is a huge challenge. The region is almost bearing 50% of the undernourished population in the world. Wasting is a big concern. Stunting is rising. And if you see that the access to healthy diets, if you look at that component, almost 200 million people in the region do not afford the cost of a healthy diet. So I think the point I'm trying to make here is that we have to stop viewing health systems as a passive recipient of populations that are made sick by climate-driven failures in other systems. We do need to identify the cross vulnerabilities, and that requires a fundamental shift in how we approach it. The mindset, not just, I come from a research organization, so the methods that are available to us are still, kind of progressing by the day when it comes to looking at these developing this. So one of the things that we are trying to do is to work with the health and demographic surveillance sites around the world to embed climate information in how the health impacts in these populations are being studied, because that does offer us the opportunity to look at the socio-economic impacts, health outcomes, but also a more long-term, 10-year plus view in terms of how populations are evolving in a changing climate. The other thing I would say is that we do need to look at the invisible links and, more importantly, quantify them. And that is the challenge. And I have my IPCC colleagues sitting here, that the challenge of attribution, the challenge of contribution is quite large for scientists. And then, bringing it down at the country, sub-country level, again, I don't need to tell you the challenges with that. So I think from a health systems perspective, I see there is great value in moving away from asking the question that how am I going to protect the health system from climate change, but more that how can health systems contribute to the overall resilience of the systems on which we are dependent for service delivery and for measuring the health outcomes in the population. Another example that I can give you is the work that we had done in Laos, in Vanuatu, in Malawi, and in Senegal, where we worked with communities to map the feedback loops between exposures, hazard exposures, health outcomes, including nutrition. So not just, health in an isolated way, but also looking at what solutions they see. So again, speaking to your point, of bringing in the local knowledge, but also their perceptions and their needs, but also their wants in the discussions in how adaptation mechanisms are being shaped. All of this information also moves to the discussions at the National Adaptation Planning. So we're based in Malaysia, so we are also working with UNICEF and UNDP colleagues to feed into the national level discussions in how the health maps are being discussed. And if you look at the African continent, almost out of the 55 countries, I'm giving that as an example, but there's a similar number in Asia Pacific as well. Less than half of the countries have dedicated health maps, which are also costed. So again, a huge opportunity for organizations like ours to feed into those conversations. Now, how do we address cross-system vulnerabilities? This was all about understanding them. How do we address them? I think the first is, of course, a deliberate effort to redesign on how we cooperate, govern, and most importantly, pay for a climate resilient future. How we map and model, but of course, how do we leverage diverse data systems and technology that is becoming available to us by the day, but it is also evolving very rapidly. Looking to advocate for connective versus collective intelligence. All systems have their own intelligence in terms of exposures to climate, but I think that connections between how the integrated impacts, because all of this then culminates in the same populations with repeated exposures over the time, for different hazards, but also the different health outcomes that we see, and then health systems have to basically respond to them in real time. We do need to mandate a design which advocates for multiple wins. So in the health sector, there was quite a discussion on looking at the co-benefits. And I think we are making that shift from saying that put health as a core argument for core benefits in other systems so that you can improve those conversations, improve the methods, and improve the information that is available. Consciously watch for maladaptation, and the spillover impact should not be incidental, but they should be of intent. And only then we are going to be able to, one, account for them, but also make sure that we keep the negative impacts at a minimum. Shared metrics, because we do want to learn from how these impacts are being seen. And I look to the Global Goal on Adaptation, we have 10 of those indicators which are related to health, but of the 100, making sure how countries are then going to make the links between how we collectively map progress towards adaptation. We have a lot of examples of evaluations of health systems or health interventions, but what we are lacking is how do they address inequities. And I think that, again, is a huge challenge in adaptation research. Health financing is a powerful lever for cross-sectoral action, and I will end with two examples that we have led. One is working with Lao, PDR, Vanuatu, and Solomon Islands, where a combination between safe schools and climate resilient and sustainable health facilities. The project essentially looked at structural resilience of these two structures, cooling them with reflective paints, greening them, looking at the facilities in terms of equipping them with solar power, cleaning them with having rain water harvesting systems so that you have on-site water treatment, and all of this then contributes to improvements in health, but also the sustainability angle where circular economy, responsible procurement, and local production is highlighted. My last message is the ATTACH program, and I don't know how many of you have heard about it. This is an initiative that came out of the COP26 program, which almost 99 countries as of last week have signed up to have climate resilience of healthcare facilities and the sustainability of healthcare systems. And I'm pleased to say that almost 21 countries in the Asia Pacific region are participating in this initiative. Almost 30 to 50% have conducted vulnerability and assessments for healthcare facilities, but when you look at the health NAPs, between 13 and 25% countries have actually dedicated health NAPs which talk about health systems resilience. And I would say that in terms of another regional effort that we are, from a policy perspective, we are working with the Asia Pacific Center for Environment, which is developing a regional position to be taken to COP30 to how should we improve the resilience within health systems, but then not ignoring the social determinants of health, which are predominantly determined by the other systems that my panelists have also outlined. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. So we've heard agriculture, food, health systems, but also reminded that all of this need a key enabler for transformational adaptation, and we're referring to financial systems. So I'm really pleased to now introduce our next panelist, Achala Ibisinghe. She comes from GCF, Director of Investment Services. She's part of over 20 years of her professional life around climate change, sustainable development. She was also with GGGI before that as Director and Head of Program of Asia. And earlier we talked about Winston representing AR7. We also talked about Pribati representing AR6. So Achala was part of AR5. So it's a nice history and evolution to talk about this as a lead author. So Achala, I mean, I'm sure this next 4 days, people are going to be coming to the GCF team asking about financing. But the one thing is, we all think about GCF funding as funding for individual projects, as if the business of GCF is to fund those individual disconnected projects. What is lesser known is that a key mandate of GCF is also to promote system-wide change, including how do you incentivize integration across the systems. So, Achala, tell us more about how you are doing that at GCF and the rest of the financial systems.
Thank you, Dindo. In contrast to Revati, I counted how many financing sessions were there for this APAN meeting, and there were many. Thank you to the APAN team for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure and honor to be on this panel as well. So 2 parts in the question, Dindo. One is how do we consider system-wide approaches when we allocate funding? And the other one is what type of financial instruments or modalities that we employ to incentivize integrated cross-system adaptation efforts rather than fragmented projects. I'm glad you mentioned, Dindo, that we do actually project funds, but when we do fund projects, we do look at systematic change, particularly when it comes to resilience building in countries. Just before I go to a little bit of details in terms of how we do that, just a brief reminder that the GCF is the largest climate fund in the world. We have been operating only for 10 years, so still very young. And for these 10 years, we have now committed $18 billion in climate projects across 314 projects in 130 countries, and that itself is quite impressive, I think, in terms of numbers. And I assume your project slide, Vincent, has some of those transformational projects coming from GCF financing. With co-financing, it is around $66 billion for these 18 billion committed funding in these 10 years. At the last board meeting alone, we approved projects worth $1.2 billion. Now, when it comes to adaptation and resilience, we have committed $4.9 billion in total adaptation finance. With co-financing, it comes to $6.6 billion. But the purpose of today's discussion, I think, is not necessarily about the size or these numbers. You want to talk about the strategy, how we bring, how we emphasize, how we encourage system-wide approaches to building adaptation, building resilience in our countries. First, all our projects or programs must be embedded in nationally determined priorities. And therefore, I'm going to actually put the onus back to the countries and project proponents. We emphasize the need for direct access, even though we have international partners like FAO, UNDP, UNEP, doing great job in terms of bringing projects at scale and scope. But we do also emphasize quite a lot in terms of direct access, so that the countries bring their own organizations to work with us directly, reaching the last mile communities in the countries. We also emphasize on funding every stage of the investment cycle. So we are not just only funding a project, but we also do have financing for readiness and capacity strengthening, planning, intergovernmental, and also whole society, whole government coordination. We do have funding from the initial planning stage, as I mentioned, as well as funding for project preparation support, and then full funding for projects, as I mentioned before. Now, what do we look at when it comes to approving a project? Not just the GCF as the secretariat, but also our board. We do have very strong investment criteria, 6 investment criteria that we look at. The first criteria is the impact potential that we look at, which means when it is not a siloed project, when it is a system, a program that brings system change to build resilience, our board looks at these kind of programs very favorably. We do look at paradigm shift potential, which means funding proposals funding proposals that identify a vision for paradigm shift. And that means they go beyond a siloed project. They catalyze impact beyond one-off investment. We do look at sustainable development potential, as well as very strongly the need of the recipient. And we also look at projects or programs in terms of their efficiency and effectiveness. In particular, how a program or a project we fund brings co-financing and diverse set of partners together to achieve a larger outcome. To this extent, we also use a mix of grants, loans, equity, and guarantees, but more importantly, we use de-risking strategies and blended finance to crowd in partners. Now, finally, in terms of how what we look at in terms of approving a project or a program, very importantly, and I want to go back to this point that I mentioned before, we look country ownership. So again, I'm putting the onus back to the countries to bring the system-wide change through a program to GCF to be funded. We look at nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, as well as low emission resilient development strategies very carefully, and how the project or a program is linked to these documents, these strategies very carefully when we approve funding proposals. Recently, we have started to focus more on locally led climate action, including locally led climate adaptation programs, as well as supporting the indigenous peoples. If you look at the recently approved accreditation reforms, that is the model to work with GCF through our partnership model, we emphasize several prioritization criteria, and amongst those, two of the criteria are we will prioritize organizations that bring locally led climate action related projects or programs, or projects or programs that support indigenous peoples. Now, I want to come very quickly to the importance of one of the financial instruments that we have at GCF, which is the Readiness Program. I'm glad that Robert also mentioned this. This is where we actually help countries to plan, systematically plan, because without a proper plan, we will always end up getting a siloed project. But we are not saying countries plan without support from the GCF. In the new readiness strategy, we have allocated $4 million for each eligible country for general coordination, general planning for climate programs, and $3 million for national adaptation plans, either to prepare your national adaptation plan or transition to implementation of the national adaptation plan. And this is compared to the project financing that we have, $7 million per country for readiness is a smaller amount, but this is one of the most crucial tools that we have to support countries to think systematically, coordinate cohesively, and bring that whole society, whole government approach to programs that is funded by the GCF. Two examples that I want to bring before I close my intervention is related to country platforms. We have now started to encourage countries to think, utilize readiness funding to have a more adaptable system-wide coordination and planning mechanisms that align climate and economic plans, mobilize public and private investment, and ensure inclusive results across systems. And these platforms are supposed to bring governments, bring together the governments, civil society, indigenous communities, as well as private sector to co-create solutions. And these are for us not just planning tools, but they are engines of transformation. Two projects that we have recently approved, one for Brazil's climate and ecological transformational investment platform. You will hear quite a lot about this at the COP30, utilizing GCF readiness funding to bring these investors and other stakeholders for cohesive and systematic thinking to build resilience in the country. And the other one is the Caribbean Regional Platform. This is another bold, regionally led model which uses innovative financial instruments to reduce debt burdens while investing in water and food security in these selected countries in the Caribbean region. And it's for these countries, it's not just adaptation, it's economic renewal as well. I will stop here. There is quite a lot to talk about, but very happy to come back if there are questions to GCF or if there are requests for bilateral discussions. Thank you very much, Dindo.
Thank you very much, Achale. We've heard about agriculture, food, health, and now financial systems, and we seem to give you the impression that these systems exist in parallel, that need to be connected, that need to be linked. But if you look at it from another perspective, in terms of geographies, they are co-located, they coexist. In fact, they're hard to separate. So our next three panelists here are going to help us look at the systems, but from the point of view of their specific geographies, whether it's mountains or islands or river systems. And let's take the perspective of the mountains first, and that's with David Potter. He's from ICIMOD, International Center for Integrated Mountain Development in Nepal. And he serves as the head of the Regional Action and Global Advocacy before ICIMOD, 17 years in a range of technical leadership roles with the UK government, including with FCDO as head of the climate and environment profession. David, what would be interesting for us, when we hear about ICIMOD and the Hindu Kush Himalayas, we think it's so far away. Why would we care of those systems when we live here in Bangkok or we're down there in Indonesia? What's the connection? And how do you make a case that when we talk about mountain-based adaptation initiatives, it does drive transformational shifts, not only in the mountain systems, but for all these other systems that we're talking about, including urban centers in the rest of the region?
Thanks very much, Dindo. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak today. Well, I mean, Dindo, my first point is actually that the mountains, particularly the mountains of the Hindu Kush Himalaya, which is the mountain region ICIMOD focuses on primarily, are entirely an interconnected ecosystem. So I would start by challenging your first point. The mountains might feel a long way away, but they are integrally connected with the surrounding ecosystems, and particularly with ecosystems downstream. The Hindu Kush Himalaya provides ecosystem services for around 2 billion people, and the mountains are directly linked to those ecosystems downstream through rivers and through floodplains, and even linked to island systems through the water and sediment flows that flow from them and the ecosystem and ecological services they provide. So I think that's my first point, is integration and connectivity is really key in the mountains. And in these interconnected ecosystems, cascading positive benefits can be found. If one is to invest in upstream systems, then you can see benefits in downstream systems as well. We see that a lot, for example, in the reduction of flood risk, the improvement in the supply of agricultural water in the lowlands when we invest in adaptation measures in the mountains. And equally, vulnerabilities exist in such a cross-system setup, because if there's a shock in a mountain system, very often we see impacts downstream. And that can be the same for longer term impacts, like rising temperatures, which are reducing the amount of snowpack in the Himalayan mountains, and also the amount of glacial ice. And that in turn is reducing the water supply in the summer in those downstream areas. So again, interconnectivity is key. And what we're seeing is that fragmented adaptation approaches can actually worsen the situation here, because, for example, if you introduce a flood control measure upstream without looking at the impact downstream, that can shift the problem rather than resolve it. So we need to embrace a system-wide approach with a regional system thinking approach. And at ICIMOD, we're trying to do that by using a few key tools. Some of these have been mentioned already, but I think important to reiterate those ones. For example, we try to take a landscape approach across the mountain ecosystem and across countries to integrate ecosystems, governance, and culture together. We try and use network frameworks to address a range of thematic issues at the same time in parallel: water, food, energy, and biodiversity, for example. And in fact, ICIMOD is structured in a way to try and encourage that. But it would be crazy to try and do these things alone. And we spend a lot of our efforts supporting regional and national partners, not only to try and understand and contextualize what transformational adaptation might look like, but also to link partners up so that our collective activities are more efficient and effective. We convene communities of practice so that we can engage with governments, academia, civil service, as well as similar ingos like ourselves. And I'm a big fan of foresight and scenario-based tools. I think these are really important. We heard Youssef talking about this morning, about the importance of keeping a focus on the long term when there might be short-term drivers influencing our work. One quick example of where we've been working like this, which speaks a bit to what Robert was talking about, community learning centres, where we have been working to try and alter the model of agricultural extension in Nepal. We've been working with 10 partners, scaled up our work across 50 villages in Nepal to embed learning directly at the grassroots level. And we've seen a shift in the way that climate resilient agriculture has been recognised and represented in the country, and also in government at local and provincial levels, and also now in university curricula as well. And we're hoping to push this into a long-term value-driven change in the region. And there are, again, knock-on impacts downstream through improved land, water, and food system management. I think that's a good, if rather contained, example of what I'm talking about here. My time's slipping away, so I'll leave you with 3 strategic shifts that I'd like to emphasize before I finish. I think, firstly, very important that we focus on structural and systemic interventions, those kinds of interventions that can address the risks that single sector strategies can't address. I think, secondly, we need to support regional platforms, and in fact, any modality for encouraging regional discussion and integration like this forum, because I think that transboundary dialogue is a really important one that often gets missed. And finally, on finance, I think financial mechanisms that can incentivize projects that can generate benefits across systems rather than within silos are ones that, again, we should spend more time looking at. Thanks very much. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, David. And thank you for reminding us of one important aspect of, again, transformational adaptation, interconnectivity, and highlighting how the high mountains relate downstream to the other systems you're referring to. And we'll even take it farther by going now to the islands. And we're really pleased to have with us Tim Nakalibo, who works for the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, Climate Change Adaptation Officer. Has over 10 years experience in the Pacific in the areas of climate change adaptation and land use planning. It's interesting, and I was talking with Tim about 3 weeks ago, the Pacific, specifically Fiji, convened and hosted the UNEP Ministers of Environment meeting. And that really showcased the importance, but also the risk, the existential risk faced by the Pacific Island nation and small island development countries. So thanks to UNEP for having that forum there. But Tim, the question is, and I think similar to what you talk about the high mountains, we talk about small island development states, especially in the Pacific, we think about remoteness. We think about sparsely, populated areas. Why you think we should be focusing on transformational adaptation in the Pacific? Because not only for the systems that exist there, but how they also impact the rest of us who are not from the islands. What are those interconnected elements that actually David has mentioned earlier? Over to you, Tim.
Yes, thank you, Dindo. So just before going into the question a bit, Bulavinaka, and one Pacific greetings from to the panelists here and also the attendees here today. Before going also into the question, I thought I'd highlight a bit on the work that the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program is doing in the Pacific. We serve 21 member countries in the Pacific with our 5 metropolitan countries, and in serving our Pacific Island countries to address their vulnerabilities to climate change. And this is to facilitating access to finance, but also technical and also support to our countries in addressing the impacts of climate change in the Pacific. So when we talk about climate change impacts in the Pacific, we're all too familiar with this, talking about sea level rise, higher than normal temperatures, extreme weather events and tropical cyclones, dry and also drought conditions in the Pacific. And as Dindo had rightly said, this is exacerbated by the smallness in some of these islands, the remoteness from each other, but also the small economies that we have to live with in the Pacific. And in terms of transformative adaptation approaches, we have found some transformative adaptation approaches that I'd like to highlight here. I'd like to touch on 4 and also pick on some examples from around the Pacific on how this has worked and how we are adapting through these adaptation approaches, transformational approaches, I guess. So the first one is being, as highlighted by some of our panelists here as well, is taking an integrated and systematic approach in terms of planning and also in the implementation of our adaptation approaches, taking a sectoral approaches, also in integrating a sectoral approach in terms of our planning and also implementation of some of our adaptation strategies. This has come through through climate smart food systems, so integrating land and sea management, reach to reef approaches, agroecology, organic agriculture, One Health systems, integrating the human, animal, and ecosystem health, but also nature-based solutions, restoring our forest, mangrove, and also coral reef ecosystems. The second point is on promoting localized and scalable solutions, homegrown solutions that are contextualized and also have good ownership from the communities as well. So talking about community-based resource management, having local forest and fish wardens, agroforestry, watershed management, and also alternative livelihoods to ensure adaptation at the local level. And the third one being regional cooperation and south-to-south learning. One thing we've learned in the Pacific is that we've had to pool resources and we have to aggregate. So sharing technical services, regionals, and we have regional centers of excellence in the Pacific. One based at SPREP is the Pacific Climate Change Center. So this is responsible for climate change knowledge brokerage and also research. We also have the Pacific Climate Change Roundtable. So and also the Pacific Meteorological Council. So we have to. This brings together the meteorological and also the climate change heads in the Pacific to pool resources, but also learn from each other. Joint trade facilitation and also policy alignment across the small island development states. So talking about common and addressing commonalities in our policies, but also standardize and approaches and learning from each other and building on Pacific experiences. Whether it's NEPs or NDCs, there's an opportunity to learn and also from each other and try to align some of these our policies. And the fourth one is on institutional and governance innovations. So one of the challenges we've had with implementing the national adaptation plans in the Pacific is that it is across sectors. So the challenge is coordinating across these sectors at national level. So this has been the missing piece in some of our implementation at national level. So innovating through building adaptive institutions capable of coordinating through across sectors at national level, but also leading up to the regional climate Pacific climate change ministerial or roundtables. And also talking about mainstreaming resilience into development planning, into provincial planning, NEPs, and also NDCs, but also including youth and also indigenous people in these consultations, and also leveraging traditional knowledge and also intergenerational innovation for and solutions. I think those are some of the lessons learned from the Pacific. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. So from the high mountains of the Pacific, we now move all the way back to Central Asia, the rivers and the floodplains. And we're really pleased to have with us also as our final speaker in this panel, Dilevarsho Dassuda. Dilevarsho is from CAREC, so the Regional Environmental Center for Central Asia. He's advisor to the Executive Director and Manager of the Regional Climate Action Hub. He's held various key positions in the government of the Republic of Tajikistan, including being the national focal point for UNFCCC and permanent rep to WMO. Dilevarsho, what is unique, I think in your case, of the 6 panelists we have here, is you represent a regional cooperation platform, CAREC. which intends to connect the economies of Central Asia. So tell us about CARIC's integration efforts, because you work across energy, water, health, infrastructure. How do all this lead to the common goal of promoting transformational adaptation?
Thank you, Dindo. As you have said, I'm representing here the Regional Environmental Center for Central Asia, comprising with it 5 countries of Central Asia and one of 2 organizations, regional organizations that have the mandate to work in all Central Asian countries, but we are more not kind of dealing that much with the political issues, but more in the practical integration of the all approaches that are interconnected within the all environmental and climate change issues in the region. And as you have said, I mean, all previous speakers that has said, all of them are interconnected. Whatever this kind of regional cooperation between the mountains, rivers, and whatever is kind of have to be kind of taken into the mind when we are talking about the issues of regional cooperation, or maybe the resilience, vulnerability, or whatever is kind of being implemented within the region. And first of all, what I want to say that resilience in the face of climate change is not only about strengthening individual system, such as mountain, river, or floodplains, but also about recognizing how deeply interconnected these systems are. As an example, I would say that, for example, in Central Asia, what happens in the high mountains of the Pamir and Tian Shan is inseparably from the what happens in the downstream and what in the inlands, like for example in the downstream countries where Sirdarya and Amu Darya flows and the floodplains are existing. And melting glaciers in the headwaters influence irrigation, agriculture, hydropower, and even the survival of ecosystem hundreds of kilometers away, because in one country like Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan as an upstream country where glaciers are melting and water kind of coming up and turns through the several countries like Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan. It's all interconnected within the transboundary rivers. So without regional cooperation, it's kind of we cannot imagine our working within those countries and within the region. And this is not unique for Central Asia. Across the globe, islands, coastal systems, and river deltas face the same reality. Vulnerabilities cascade across interconnected systems. And here, let me start with the vulnerabilities that are crucial in the Central Asian region. In Central Asia, as I said, these 2 issues of mountain and rivers. Glaciers retreat in the mountains leads to a short-term increase in flooding risk from glacier lakes, but in the long term it reduces summer water flows, threatening both agriculture and energy. That is a mountain river vulnerability that we can kind of give an example. In the downstream plains, heavy irrigation and rigid canal systems exacerbate water scarcity and salinization. When droughts hit, rural communities are left without safety nets, and this kind of the community migration and other kind of risks would exist and would come up within the population in the region. And saying by that, cross-system vulnerabilities are real. What looks like a mountain problem or an inland problem is actually a chain reaction which interconnected with each other. But interconnections are not only a source of risk, they also offer synergies for resilience. In Central Asia, restoring floodplain connectivity can reduce downstream flood risk, while also replenishing aquifers for agriculture use. And as well, adaptive reservoir management in the mountain catchments can balance energy production with controlled flood pulses that sustain ecosystem downstream. What I would say here that all this kind of the interconnected relationships between these sectors and between the countries with conduction of regional dialogues, with the regional platforms that our organization CARIC is establishing and giving the floor to all the countries to kind of as David said, this kind of the forums which are on the regional, on the global level are happening. So giving this kind of the opportunity for the countries to interconnect with each other and talking with each other would come up with some more ideas of the peace between the countries, because the water in the region of Central Asia is a kind of a source of kind of risky issue between the countries, because all the time water is have this kind of the scarcity between the countries. So this the latest issue between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, what happened, and after what Karek has been doing in these cases by creating small basin councils, because there are kind of big rivers that are transboundary and that all the tension is going within these rivers, but there are small rivers which are as well kind of transboundary rivers that are kind of all the population between those countries are linked with these rivers, and they are depending on those rivers, and this kind of the tense between them making it a little bit their living source is going to be a little bit harsh on that. And this interconnected lens is at the heart of transformational adaptation. Under this kind of the change approach, we focus on one system and is isolations. For example, building a larger dam in the mountains or a higher dike on the floodplain. And all of them are kind of interconnected as well with them, between each other. And to conclude here, I would like to say that the vulnerabilities of our interconnected systems are really clear here, and stressing one geography cascades into others. And Central Asia's experience with glacier monitoring, adaptive water governance, and local small basin councils offers promising examples of how transformational adaptation can emerge when we treat rivers and floodplains not as isolated units, but as a part of a larger living systems. Because kind of by making this kind of the separation, we are bringing more things not only in the nature, but among the countries which are dependent of these sources like water and kind of mountain glaciers or whatever they. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dilevarto. So we've heard so many different diverse systems and synergies. We'd like to move towards closing this section by having a single and rapid fire question. In less than 1 minute, we'll ask again our 6 panelists with one simple question. If you could catalyze one change in the systems that you represent or work in to accelerate transformational adaptation, what would be that catalytic one change that you have? And if you could add, okay, who should be leading that change? So we start with Robert.
Great, thank you, Dindo. The impossible question, but I have 1 minute. First, I think in reality, looking at the diversity and richness of this discussion and really the eminent panel members and the perspectives that have been shared, I don't think that any one leveraging point or one catalytic action is going to cover all bases, the interrelation of everything that's happening here. But to be a sport and respond to the question fairly, if there is one area, it would really be, I've already alluded to this, is really access to and catalyzing financing. And I'm going to piggyback on top of that, bringing a stronger and sort of harmonized action area for private sector engagement in all of this. And we haven't spoken much about private sector, but I think it's implicit in everything that everyone has mentioned, that private sector has to be driving quite a bit of this. And so far, private sector isn't necessarily fully empowered to the same level of sort of a social advancement that all of the partners at the table necessarily are. And this is obvious because they have different motivations, and I don't fault that in the least, so please don't take that the wrong way. But we have the smallholders that have the smallest amount of resources that are coming to them. It costs money to make all of the sort of transformational changes that have been mentioned, whether it be in agriculture, health services, and in bringing participants together in different platforms, whatever it is. So this catalyzing finance and bringing private sector to the table, absolutely paramount. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Ribati, the same rapid fire question in 60 seconds.
Thank you. So for me, it's going to be strengthening accountabilities because I think transformation does require a shift in the operating logic of individually of these systems and in relation to each other. And for the second part of your question, who should be kind of doing this? I think that approach necessarily requires a polycentric governance structure where there are multiple kind of levels at which you have a multi-level leadership approach to that. And I will end with saying that let's make multiple benefits everybody's business. Thank you.
Thank you, Ribati. And Achala.
For me, embed climate resilience into public finance systems through conscious and systematic planning. Why? Because public finance systems shapes everything in our countries, from infrastructure to education to health. When climate risk is integrated into budgeting, procurement and investment decisions, resilience becomes systematic. And this has to come from the top of the governments, from the head of state to ministries of finance, from ministries of planning. And when public finance sends the right signals, the private sector follows with investments in nature-based solutions, resilience infrastructure and more. So for me, what is most essential is integrating resilience into public planning and public finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Achala. And David?
Thanks, Dindo. I would say a greater focus on transboundary issues, and I'd pick that because I think often these are the issues that are the least well recognized and have the poorest data, and actually there are often the weakest political signals to identify these issues within countries. And I would point the finger at governments themselves to recognize that actually there is a real national importance in looking at these transboundary issues as well. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Dindo. I think for me, it's improving our internal institutional and governance mechanisms. So it goes back to a point that you raised, Dindo, yesterday in one of the rooms. There is finance there, but I think there are some blockages within our own internal systems to ensure that these funds reach the communities out in that are waiting for this. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, the Labarsha.
Yeah, thank you. So getting back, I want to say about the Central Asian kind of problematic, and what I would kind of stress here, it's about putting the small transboundary rivers and floodplains in the adaptation strategies and put it in as a core, because these are the kind of the issues that getting more tense, problematic relationships between the countries in Central Asia, and by putting this in the as a core of in the adaptation strategies, I think we can deal it within the country. And as well, we for the second part of the question, who should kind of get these issues to be implemented in the Central Asia? It's the political organization. The regional one is International Fund for RLC, which kind of deals all the water issues in the Central Asia, so they could deal this issue and make it implementable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilawarsha. Besides being pressed for time, I think it's good to remember that plenary sessions in APAN, including this one, are not meant to end with definitive statements or conclusions. Today is day one, right? The purpose of having plenary sessions such as this is to stimulate further debate and discussions, because these are going to be taken up again and again in the sessions until Friday. Having said that, we would like to put together a way to summarize and synthesize what we've heard so far in the last 90 minutes. One of it is thanks to technology, and I think it's going to show up soon, what AI has heard from all of us today. Somebody's listening, in case you didn't know. At the same time, I'm really very pleased that someone is taking up the challenge of helping summarize the key discussion points today. And that someone happens to be Linda Ann Stevenson from APN. Linda.
Thank you so much. I do realize that we're 5 minutes over time, but we did start late, so if you could give me 5 minutes, that would be fantastic. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a privilege and a pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks at the close of this plenary. On behalf of the organizers and participants, I extend my heartfelt appreciation to all who have made this session so enriching and so inspiring. First, our warm thanks to our moderator, Dindo, Regional Director for Asia and the Hub Director for Oceania at the IUCN, for really guiding the discussion with clarity and balance, and by framing the session at the outset by quoting that transformational adaptation is the work of no one but everyone. We are also grateful to Professor Winston Chow, co-chair of the IPCC Working Group 2, who set the scene by drawing attention to the core systems that underpin resilience: food, agriculture, land, water, biodiversity, health, cities, and infrastructure, and why their interlinkages and synergies are central to transformational adaptation. We also look forward to seeing thinner reports when the 7th assessment cycle is concluded. Panel 1 focused on systems perspective. And I must have deleted some of Robert from FOA. I did have a lot written, but he did reflect on how progress in one system, such as agri-food systems, can unlock wider resilience and sustainability benefits. Revity from UNU Institute for Global Health drew attention to cross-system vulnerabilities, such as the links between climate resilience and health systems, and how they're associated to water insecurity, unreliable services and facilities, and food insecurity. We need to redesign how we map, model, and govern health systems. Achala from GCF shared perspectives on integrating system-wide approaches into funding and using financial instruments to support cross-system adaptation. GCF financing places considerable importance on systematic change for inclusive resilience building, including locally led adaptation. Panel 2 then brought diverse geographic perspectives. David from EC Mod highlighted how mountain systems are an entirely interconnected ecosystem that's vital for millions downstream. Mountain systems integration and interconnectivity can drive transformational adaptation across agriculture, water, food, and a range of other systems. Tim from SPREP spoke on pathways for Pacific small island states to strengthen resilience across food. For example, the use of nature-based solutions and restoring ecosystems. This is despite the extreme climate impacts that the Pacific Islands face and the challenges of scale, cross-sectoral implementation, and finance. Dilovarsho from CAREC, I got it right, emphasized how regional cooperation across energy, water, health, and infrastructure can promote the common goal of transformational adaptation in Central Asia. He emphasized interconnectedness in the region from the upstream to the downstream. This is also true when considering regional cooperation. And resilience in the face of climate change is about recognizing how deeply these are interconnected. I don't think I have time to go into the catalytic changes, but I do have a list here. But I will close by saying these contributions underscore the urgency of our shared challenges and the promise of integrated, interconnected, collaborative solutions. They will go far in allowing us to catalyze the shift towards transformational adaptation, and in doing so, advance the very theme of this plenary, which was on diversities and synergistic shifts across systems. Lastly, once again, I thank all participants for being here so late and extend my deep gratitude to our moderator, our distinguished speakers, our panelists, and to the organizers and hosts who made this session possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. And before we formally close the event, of course, we need the man of the hour. I'll say the man of the week. And other than Babu, where are you, Babu? Oh, yeah, on the other side. Okay. Over to you, Babu.
All right. Thank you. I don't know how many times they're going to see me, and maybe they will start hating me. Dindo. Colleagues, friends, the primary reason I'm here is also to show you the summary that you have heard from the first plenary and this plenary. We are also trying to capture through visual arts as much as possible in succinct way. So I'd like to just show you very briefly that how we are also behind the scene, a small team working hard, trying to capture key messages through visual arts. So I'll just show you this is what they have captured. So our whole idea is capturing the key messages through this type of the visual arts, which we will present to you at the very end, which is our closing the session of APAN Forum. So this is one of the things I thought it would be good to at least share with you what we are also trying to do, capturing your thoughts. Now, I know that I'm standing between the reception and what I'm going to say about tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll be starting with the plenary session, and then throughout the day, we'll have 15 the technical sessions. So please be mindful of those and be energetic so that we don't lose getting the insight from you too. So with that, I'd like to thank all the panel members, and if you don't mind to give them a big round of applause before we move to the food. Thank you very much. Please enjoy the food, and we are here until 8 p.m. Thank you. Thank you once. Oh, he's just signaling. Oh, okay. Sorry, one thing I missed.